Welcome to Implausible Nature, home to competitive Black Templars gameplay.
Alright guys, so today's video we are talking about secondary objectives. There are a lot of choices for these. When you go to pick your secondaries, sometimes the choices can be overwhelming. Which ones are good? Which ones are going to be subpar for you? How do I choose based on what my opponent is? We're going to break them down for you, go through each one individually. We are also going to talk about the Space Marine specific ones, and then we're going to go through the 2000 point, the Strike Force mission specific ones as well, because 2000 points is the most popular size game to be playing at, especially if you're going to be playing in a tournament. You're most likely going to be playing 2000 points. Also note we are looking specifically at the GT secondaries because that again is going to be the most common game type. Eternal War ones are similar but a little different in some cases, so just keep that in mind. These are specifically going to be the GT ones. So we are going to go category by category. Just to kind of review how secondaries work for you guys, you will choose your secondaries after you've seen your opponent's army list, after you've seen the mission, once the terrain is set up. All those things have already happened. So basically, the only thing that you don't know is going to be deployment and then who's going first. So you have to choose 3 secondaries, and there are several categories, and you can only choose 1 secondary from each category. You can also only choose 1 secondary from your Space Marine specific ones. There are 3 Space Marine specific ones, each in a different category, and you can only choose 1 total from your Space Marine book. We'll start it off with Battlefield Supremacy. There are going to be 4 of these, including the Space Marine specific one, and we'll start off with Engage on All Fronts. This secondary, you score 2 victory points at the end of your turn if you have 1 or more units in your army wholly within 3 different table quarters, and those units are all more than 6 inches from the center of the battlefield, or 3 victory points if instead you have units in all 4 table quarters. So this is a really great secondary. It's going to be one of our go-tos in every single game, especially with the playstyle that Black Templars like to play, where we spread the board. We want to capture objectives anyway. They're going to be spread across the board anyway. So really fits in with not only our playstyle, but how 9th edition games are run. You want to be a little bit more spread out across the board to capture those primary objectives as well. And it is going to be pretty easy to score 2 points a turn with this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be something that is very common across all of these secondaries is you want to be able to control what you do on the battlefield and score based on what you're doing. So you don't want to rely on your opponent to do something. You want to be able to be the person or the player that is controlling their destiny, and this is one of those secondaries that allows you to do that. You control putting your units in those table quarters. You don't have to rely on your opponent to do it. So it's very easy. Even if you only get the 2 victory points over the course of the 5 turns, you're still scoring 10 victory points, which is pretty much what you want to do, getting 10 points or more in a game on each secondary option. But you have the opportunity to get 3, so you can score up to that 15 points, and it's very easy to do. You just move into those different quarters. Our next one is going to be Linebreaker. That one's going to be scoring 4 victory points at the end of your turn if 2 or more units in your army, except aircraft, are wholly within your opponent's deployment zone. So on this one, like Engage on All Fronts, this one does allow you to control your own destiny. However, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to accomplish because of the fact that you have to get 2 units all the way across the board and survive in their deployment zone. So presumably your opponent's going to have quite a few different units over on that side of the board, and they won't last too terribly long. There's a much more distance that you have to get across, but there is some niche things that you can do to get there, like concealed positions that will allow you to get those. But it is more difficult to accomplish, especially if you have the first turn.
Yeah, I agree. It does score at the end of your turn, which is nice because you can get those units in there. Some downsides, though, are definitely it has to be wholly within their deployment zone, so you can't have half your unit in it and half your unit out, which makes it a little more difficult. Also, you want to be thinking about, can I score 10 points or more with this in the game? And to score 10 points or more with this, you're going to have 2 units wholly within their deployment zone for 3 turns. That's a lot to ask. It also is going to be troublesome, like Bob said, to get our units completely within their deployment zone on the first turn, which means you only really have 4 turns to accomplish this. Moving on, we have Domination. This is score 3 victory points if you control more than half the total number of objective markers on the battlefield at the end of your turn. Again, this one is going to be more difficult to achieve. It can be situationally good. I think in some missions where, especially the missions where there's only 4 objective markers, of which there's a couple in Strike Force, it can be useful. You really have to look at the mission, where the objectives are in that mission, what your opponent is running before you take this, because obviously we want to control the primary objectives, but in a 6 objective mission, you're looking at controlling 4 of them at the end of your turn. That is definitely easier said than done, especially in today's meta where everything is, getting more and more deadly.
Yeah, it does pair reasonably well with objective game, but as Alex said, if you're running 6 objectives on the board, it's very tough to make sure that you have 4 of them, especially with the meta today with the Drukhari and the Harlequins, who can far outspeed you to those objectives. It's just really difficult to ensure that you are getting that completed every turn. So in this batch, it may not be the greatest choice. And our final one is going to be Shock Tactics, which is out of the Space Marine Codex. Score 3 victory points at the end of the battle round if you control 1 or more objective markers that were controlled by your opponent at the start of the battle round. So this one is okay. It's not something that's going to be front and center, but it relies entirely on what your opponent is doing, which is not something that we want to have for a secondary. We don't control our destiny on this one. Too many things have to go your way to make sure that it works. It's way too difficult to accomplish. We have much easier ones in this slot.
Yeah, I agree. Like Bob said, this is going to be something that relies on your opponent doing something, which is controlling an objective, which we don't want them to control objectives. So you may be able to, score a few points, or 3 points, or 6 points maybe at most, once you take those objectives the first time. But our goal is to hold those objectives, not give them back up. So it's definitely going to be a more difficult one to score a lot of points on, because you can only score 3 points a turn on it, which means to max out, you got to do this 5 turns in a row. The likelihood of that is very, very low. So that is it for Battlefield Supremacy. Moving on to the next category, No Mercy, No Respite. And there are going to be 4 secondaries that you can choose from in this, including one from our codex. The first one is going to be Thin Their Ranks, which is you keep a tally of kill points each time an enemy model is destroyed. You add 1 to that tally, or 10 if the model was destroyed had a characteristic of wounds characteristic of 10 or more. And then if a model is resurrected, like for example Necrons or something similar previously, and then is returned to the battlefield, you can kill them again and get another point for it. At the end of the game, you will tally up all your kill points and divide them by 10 and round down, and this is the result is the number of victory points you score. So that's really wordy for in order to get the 10 victory points that we are looking for out of a secondary in a game, you have to kill 100 models. There are not many armies that are running 100 models these days. Even, orcs or Tyranids, the odds of you killing that many models is low. Yes, you can get 10 points from killing a 10 wound model or more, but ultimately this is going to be very difficult to score a significant amount of points from. You're certainly not going to max it out. It focuses a lot on killing the enemy, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but that can pull you off of primary objectives to go and kill something, to make sure that you get those points, and that's bad.
Yeah, I agree. You're not going to see armies with 100 models in it, let alone 150. Nor are you going to see enough monsters or vehicles in that opponent's list to be able to score what you need to do. And ultimately, do you have enough guns and firepower to even kill that many? Likely going to have to table them to get the points that you need from this, and we're not likely to do that. So it's one of those leave it at home secondaries. So the next one is grind them down. Score 3 victory points at the end of the battle round if more enemy units than friendly units were destroyed this battle. So this one actually is pretty good. This is something that doesn't play to how much is in your opponent's list, other than you do have to kill more than what they kill of you. So ideally they have more units in their list than you do. So obviously more elite armies will have a better shot at this. But you have to think about having elite armies and smaller unit sizes in your army. It makes it harder for you to capture primary objectives. So you don't want to get too far down in the amount of units that you have. But it is something that is reasonably decent, easy to kill with the style of list that we build. Pretty elite slot focused with Vanguard veterans, Terminators, Dreadnoughts, that type of thing, that can kill opponent's units, one or more units per turn. And they're very durable on our end as well, with many of them taking storm shields. So that's something that could potentially be a secondary choice for you in a battle against the right.
Yeah, I agree, because you can score 3 points simply by you killing something and them killing nothing of yours. So, its main downside is that it does rely somewhat on your opponent doing something, which is not dealing enough damage to you to kill a unit. So, not a bad choice, not going to be your first choice either. Which brings us to While We Stand, We Fight. This was updated in the most recent errata, the version 1.2. And it's a very lengthy paragraph. So the basic gist of it is you choose 3 units, not 3 models, 3 units from your army that cost the most points, including all their upgrades and gear. Those 3 units, for each one that is still alive at the end of the battle, you score 5 points for. So if you combat squad those units, you have to kill both combat squads in order to lose the 5 points. So this one is gotten better. It used to be models, which was just not good for Space Marines. For units, though, it's gotten better. The trouble with it is that a lot of our most expensive units, things like Vanguard Vets and Terminators and Inceptors, are going to be units that are high priority targets to kill for your opponent because they are so deadly. Yes, those units are, especially Vanguard Vets and Terminators, are generally pretty durable for us. The issue is that we are throwing them right into the middle of your opponent's army, and we expect them to live long enough to kill stuff and make their points back, but not survive the whole game. So I think a unit of Terminators with an Apothecary could potentially survive this, but we're looking to score at least 10 points. So, we're not running lists with 2 10-man Terminator squads. We're usually pairing them with Vanguard Vets, which, while durable for their points, are not, they're going to be right in the middle of it and attacking the most deadly units in your opponent's army as well. So this is a tougher take for me, simply because we're not running big unkillable monsters like Mortarion. We don't have those units. So
Yeah, Alex has it right. He pretty much covered most of it on this one. The only benefit that potentially we could do with our Vanguard veterans is that we could combat squad them, and you could potentially keep half of that squad towards your deployment zone, while the more dangerous half of it goes to fight or capture objectives. So that could be one way to try and cheese some 5 points out of it, but you lose efficiency across the board doing it that way. Not typical that you're going to want to hide half of a 300 plus point Vanguard unit. So, the last one is going to be in the Space Marine Codex. It's Oath of Moment. So this one is going to be, again, more lengthy on that, but the gist of it is you score points at the end of your battle round. You have to fulfill one of 3 different options, and you get points based on each one of those. The Oath of Valor, you score 1 victory point if a character, vehicle, or monster was destroyed by an Adeptus Astartes unit from your army. Oath of Honor, you score 1 victory point at the end of the battle round as long as an Adeptus Astartes unit did not fail a morale test, and no Adeptus Astartes units fell back. And the final one is Oath of Duty. Score 2 victory points at the end of the battle round if the Adeptus Astartes unit is wholly within 6 inches of the battlefield. So this one is almost an auto take for most armies. So it gives you 3 routes to gain victory points, and you can get a total of 4 of them per turn. So over 5 turns, you can potentially get 20 points. Obviously, you max out at 15. So it gives you some leeway on being able to not get all of them every turn to be able to get those. Oath of Honor, you don't fall back, don't fail morale. So MSU is typical for the Space Marines, and the bigger, larger units that we have, the Vanguard veterans, are not going to be taking enough casualties to typically prompt a morale test or fall back. So you're going to be getting another victory points there. And then a lot of our armies have a big block of Terminators or Dreadnoughts or something to hold the middle of the board. So we more than likely will also have the center of the board to get those 2 points. So the downside is that it does not combo very well with some of those other secondaries. While Engage on All Fronts is a really good choice overall, it wants you to be outside of that center, that 6 inches, so you do have to have a dedicated unit specifically to capturing the center, while also having units capture the quarters for Engage on All Fronts. So you will most likely be picking 2 of those in your list, but you just have to have enough units to be able to do both.
Yeah, this is definitely going to be one of our top choices, like you said. I like it for a number of reasons. You can score points in multiple ways. You have the capability to score more than enough points throughout the game so that you don't have to earn max points each turn in order to even get 15 points. You can get 15 points without scoring max points every turn, which is awesome. You should very easily be able to get 10 points with this, which again is our threshold. It obviously pairs extremely well with any mission that has a central objective, because you're going to want to take that objective anyway for a primary, and now you're scoring secondary points as well. At the same time, anytime you can do that is awesome. The only downsides to it is, like Bob said, it kind of can be counterintuitive to Engage on All Fronts, and then also any mission that does not have a primary objective in the center of the battlefield can also kind of potentially pull a unit away to do this, but we generally want to control the center of the battlefield anyway, so you're rarely going to go wrong taking this objective. All right, so that does it for No Mercy, No Respite. We are moving on to Purge the Enemy. There's actually 5 options here, including one from our codex. And I feel like most of these are going to be very niche choices for you. Very dependent on your opponent's army list and what they're doing. The first one that we're going to talk about is Titan Hunter. Score 10 points at the end of the battle if you killed an enemy Titanic model, 12 if you destroyed 2, and 15 if you destroyed 3. Obviously, there are not many Titanic units out there. Mostly the ones that you're going to see in any kind of competitive play are going to be knights. So if you're facing pure knights, this might be worth taking. You only have to kill 1 knight to get 10 points. That's not too bad. Against virtually everyone else, you're not going to bother with this one.
Every once in a while, you'll see a single knight it's out there, guarantee the 10 points, and it might be worthwhile if you feel like your opponent's list prevents you from getting the other secondaries. But Usually it's going to be those pure knight lists that you're going to be wanting this, because remember, armigers are not Titanic units. So if you see those, that is going to be a problem for you. And again, like, you're not going to see Titanic units very often, so it's not going to be a big deal. Bring It Down is the next one. And this one did take a big nerf, and I would suspect it had something to do with all of those transports that were flying around the board, whether it be Harlequins or the upcoming Drukhari. Now, what the new Erta says is score 1 victory point at the end of the battle for each enemy monster or vehicle with a wounds characteristic of 10 or less that was destroyed, 2 for each enemy monster or vehicle with wounds characteristic that's 11 to 19, and 3 for each enemy or vehicle that was 20 or more. So most times you're going to have to kill quite a few different vehicles. An example is the Raider for the Drukhari right now. It's 10 wounds. You're going to have to kill at least 10 of them to get the threshold that you need. And we all know how difficult a Raider is to kill, so it is not a good option for you. Rhinos, similar, but more expensive. Transports are not very easy to kill. Monsters are not very easy to kill. With that big downside in that nerf to how many points that we got with the new update, it's just not something that we really want to invest in. But if your opponent is pure vehicles, it might be something if you have enough anti-vehicle weaponry in your battle or in your army that potentially you could kill enough. But it's just not the optimal choice anymore.
Yeah, and I think those changes were mainly due to the fact that it was so hard on Imperial Guard armies because they do love to run a lot of vehicles, and it was extremely easy against most Guard armies to score max points on this, and it was just sort of an unfair detriment to them. That being said, I don't know if they went too far with it, but it certainly basically takes it out of contention for anything less than a huge pure vehicle list, with larger wound vehicles. So unfortunately, it is going to be one of those you're often going to leave at home. That brings us to Cut Off the Head, which is at the end of the battle, you score a number of victory points if the enemy warlord was destroyed during the battle, and how many points you score is dependent on when you killed the warlord. So there is a sliding scale here, which you can see. Obviously, round 1 you score 13, which sounds great, but how often are you going to kill the warlord in the first turn? Very, very few. To get anything even reasonable, you have to kill him in 2 turns, which most warlords are going to be characters with character protection. Getting to them and killing them in 2 turns is extremely difficult, especially some of the hardier warlords like, Abaddon or Mortarion or things like that. They're going to be very difficult to bring down in 2 turns. This is definitely one that you're probably almost never going to take because the odds of scoring 13 points are slim to none, and even getting to that 10-point mark is going to be very, very difficult. So likely you're going to leave this one at home.
Yep, I agree. You pretty much covered it on that. You can't even max out your points on this one, so that's already a detriment to it. And it's nearly impossible to kill an opponent's warlord on the first turn. It's just, they're not going to let it happen. You would never let it happen. So at most, you're going to be doing 10 points. And that's just, let's be realistic. You're not killing any warlords until turn 3 or more. So it's just not a good choice. The next one's going to be Assassinate. Score 3 victory points at the end of the battle for each enemy character that has been destroyed. So this one, on paper, is really good. But it does rely on your opponent taking multiple characters in their army list. Towards the end of the battle, depending on where you're at, we're close combat. We can get into grips with those characters. So potentially we could score max points on this if they bring enough characters. The downside is most people build their list accounting for Assassinate. So at the most, you're likely to see only 4 characters, so that's going to be 12 points if you can kill them. Not always possible, but potential. But this is one's going to be kind of niche. Obviously, you're going to want to be taking it only if they have a large quantity of characters.
Yeah, I agree. Basically, the threshold for me even considering this is, do they have 4 or more characters? If they have less than that, it's not worth taking. Most competitive players are thinking about that when they're building their list, and rarely in a tournament or a competitive environment are you going to see more than 3 characters. Very occasionally, you'll see 4. You will not see 5 characters in a competitive environment. So the odds of using this in a tournament probably pretty low. All right, so that brings us to our last Space Marine specific one, which is called Codex Warfare. And this one seems good when you kind of gloss over it, but ultimately it's going to be extremely difficult to achieve. You score 1 victory point at the end of the battle to a maximum of 5 for each of 3 categories. For each enemy unit that was destroyed as a result of an attack made by a heavy or grenade made by an Astartes unit from your army while the Devastator Doctrine was active, and then again the same thing for Rapid Fire and Assault and the Tactical Doctrine, or Pistol or Melee and the Assault Doctrine. So this is incredibly challenging because you have to kill a unit, and you only get 1 victory point for doing so when you kill a unit with a heavy weapon while the Devastator Doctrine is active. So that's 1 turn. And the same thing with Rapid Fire, you're going to get at most 2 turns out of it. So that leaves you with Assault, which is where we want to be most of the time. We're going to move as quickly as we can through the doctrines to get to Assault. You're only getting 1 victory point per unit kill, and you have to kill the unit with that specific weapon in that doctrine. That is a lot of conditions just to score 1 victory point. Basically never going to be worth it on this one.
Yeah, this is really going to be more for like a gunline list that has support elements with assault, because you're really not going to be able to generate enough weapon shots in a Space Marine list to really get enough out of the Devastator Doctrine. You could potentially get a few kills out of the tactical, but most of our stuff comes out of Assault Doctrine, and we're just not going to be able to generate enough by the end of the game to get that. So I would pick the other options here before that, but they're all very niche in the Purge the Enemy. It's just something that really there's better options under the other categories, unless your army, your opponent's army, really kind of screams at you to take, like Titan Hunter. So under the Shadow Operations category, we have several different options, so 4 of those. And the first one is raise the banners high. So this is an action. So to raise your banner, 1 or more infantry units from your army can start to perform this action at the end of your movement phase. Each unit from your army that starts to perform this action must be in range of a different objective marker that does not have one of your banners raised upon. So in short on this one, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be taking a unit starting an action on an objective that doesn't have a banner already on it, and you are going to start scoring. You score 1 victory point at the end of your command phases and 1 victory point at the end of the battle for each objective marker on the battlefield that has one of your banners raised on it. Okay, so with this one, it has a little bit of conditions. First, you have to complete the action, and you have to actually have that banner there at the end of the turn. So it's reasonably decent to be able to raise your banners on several different objectives and have that be able to be there to get some points, but you're typically not going to see more than at most the 10 points out of it. But you can fairly reliably get between 8 and 10 points out of the banners simply by scoring the 1 victory point for each of your command phase you have that banner.
Yeah, this one situationally isn't bad. It is nice because your unit doesn't have to be on that objective to score those points. It just stays there as long as your opponent doesn't come and take that objective. There are a couple of missions in Strike Force that you are able to leave an objective and still control it as long as your opponent doesn't move a unit in range of it. So this would be a pretty decent one for one of those missions, because you can raise a banner on something, on, especially a home objective or something like that, first turn, and then march off to do whatever you need to, and you'll continue scoring points on that objective as long as you can protect it, keep your opponent from getting to it. The action is completed at the end of your turn, which is nice. You don't typically have to worry about your opponent doing something to interrupt you. Overall, I think there are probably better, easier options to score points than this one, but it can be situationally useful. Moving on, we've got Investigate Sites. This is another action. Infantry unit with excluding characters can perform this. Start to perform at the end of your movement phase if it is within 6 inches of the center of the battlefield and no enemy units, excluding aircraft, are within 6 inches of the center of the battlefield, and it's completed at the end of your turn. This one will score 3 victory points each time you complete this action. So that sounds pretty great on paper, especially when you think about, hey, with Oaths of Moment, we want to be in the center anyway, capturing that. But I think it falls a little short because it requires your opponent to not be within 6 inches of the center. So while it pairs well with Oaths of Moment, you have to completely block off your opponent from getting to within 6 inches. Just within 6 inches, not wholly within. So they could have one guy half an inch into the center, 6 inches of the center, and you cannot do this action. So that's where it falls a little short for me, but it's not terrible.
I agree on this one, where anything that your opponent can prevent you from getting secondary points is something that's going to negatively impact your ability to want to take it. This is going to be one of those, because it can be denied simply by your opponent's movement, and that's not good. So the next one is Deploy Scramblers. Score 10 victory points at the end of the battle if you successfully completed the following action 3 times. Once in your deployment zone, once in your opponent's deployment zone, and once more than 6 inches from either deployment zone. So what that action is one infantry unit, excluding characters from your army, can start to perform the action at the end of your movement phase if it is wholly within your deployment zone, wholly within the opponent's deployment zone, or more than 6 inches from either player's deployment zone. And it's completed at the end of your turn. So just 3 times throughout the battle, you have to have a unit in those different areas to be able to score. And that's pretty good. It's a good 10 points that you can nearly always guarantee if you build your army. With the Black Templars, we have a great unit called Cenobite Servitors that can be held in strategic reserves to pop into your opponent's deployment zone and get those Deploy Scramblers. Because most likely you'll have something in your deployment zone that's holding your objectives that can do that. And then you're going to be advancing across the board. So you will be in the middle of the board that they can deploy Scramblers as well. Often that could be Vanguard veterans that are not within range of something, dreadnoughts, terminators, something that's not going to be assaulting your opponent. If it's not in your deployment zone or your opponent's, perfect. It's an excellent choice.
Yeah, I agree. This is a pretty easy 10 points to score. You can use those Cenobites or even a Crusader squad in strategic reserves and have them come in on turn 3, right in your opponent's deployment zone, perform the action, which is nice. And, aside from completely blocking off the edges of their deployment zone, your opponent is likely not going to be able to, stop you from doing that. Great easy thing to do. You only need to do it 3 times and you have 5 turns to do so. So plenty of time to score 10 points for this. Lastly, we come to Teleport Homer. Score 4 victory points each time a unit from your army successfully completes the following action. 1 infantry unit from your army can start to perform this action at the end of your movement phase if it is wholly within your opponent's deployment zone. This action is completed at the end of your next command phase, provided the unit attempting it is still wholly within your opponent's deployment zone. This one is gonna sit at home for me almost every single game. I cannot envision a time when I would take this. 4 victory points sounds appealing, except for the fact that it doesn't get completed until the start of your next command phase. And if I have units in my opponent's deployment zone, wholly within their deployment zone, I am going to either, one, gonna be want to killing stuff in their deployment zone and taking their home objective from them, or two, I'm doing something like deploy scramblers. If I'm popping in Cenobite servitors, they're not going to survive until the end of my next command phase. So this again is another one of those ones that relies on your opponent doing or not doing something, and there are plenty of ways to interrupt actions, especially with the newer codexes. So this one just seems very easy to get negated a lot of the times. So that does it for Shadow Operations category. Brings us to the last category of the standard secondaries, which is Warpcraft. And while there are 4 here, we only care about 1 because we don't run witches in our army. So the only one that we care about here is Abhor the Witch, which was changed in the errata as well as the other 2 that we spoke about previously. It now reads, you can't take this if you include any psychers. That's fine for us. We'll never have them anyway. Score 3 victory points at the end of the battle for each enemy psyker character that is destroyed, and 2 for every other enemy psyker that is destroyed. This is, again, going to be a little bit more niche because obviously your opponent has to have psychers to even make this worthwhile taking, and they have to have multiple ones. Now, if they are running a lot of characters and those characters are all psychers, you can really easily double dip this with Assassinate and score a bunch of secondaries, but most of the time you're probably not going to take this unless you're just facing someone who is absolutely psychic heavy. Things like Thousand Suns, Grey Knights come to mind, even Tyranids maybe. So just keep that in mind. Remember you're only scoring 3 per character, which is what most psychers are, and think about how reasonable am I going to be able to score 10 points with this.
Yeah, the benefit is, if against the right army, you can still get 2 points for killing other units, and it's not reliant on just killing the characters. So for the armies that were stated there, Thousand Suns, Grey Knights, Tyranids, a few of the other armies out there, some Space Marines, Death Guard, Demons, so there's a few armies out there that if they take those Zerker army units, then you still can get the 10 points, but it's reliant on their list. So it's an option for you out there that is still reasonably easy to get the 10 points doing what we want to do, but only if they're taking Zerker heavy army lists.
All right, so that brings us to the end of the standard ones. We'll now go over the individual mission ones. Some of these are going to be okay. Some of them are going to be, pretty bad. So we'll go over them individually, starting with Retrieval Mission. Its secondary is called Minimize Losses, and basically it relies on how much of your army is left alive at the end of the battle. Again, it's 2 big paragraphs worth of stuff, which I'm not going to read for you. But you basically score points if your army is at 75% of your starting strength, a 50%, and 25% or more. So the odds of you being at 50 or 75%, of your total starting strength is incredibly unlikely. And that's the only way to get 15 points. If you have 50% or more, then you score 10. Again, I think that's pretty unlikely. So you're really only looking at like 5 points with this one in most games, and that's just not worth it to me.
Yeah, it's very rare that you're going to be so overpowering your opponent that you're going to be having 75% of your list left.
You've probably won the game at that point anyway.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to be tabling your opponent, and you're getting full points on pretty much everything else anyway, so it's not going to be something that we really want to rely on. So the next one is going to be under the Scorched Earth mission. It is called Raise. At the end of the battle, a player scores 6 victory points if one objective marker was removed from the battlefield due to a successful raise objective action performed by a unit from their army during the battle, and 12 victory points if 2 objective markers removed. So this is going to be a special mission rule here. It's going to be very difficult to accomplish, in my opinion. If you are selecting this secondary objective, they're going to know right away at the beginning of the battle what you're going to be doing, and they're going to do everything that they can to try and prevent that. The downside to this also is if you're destroying those objective markers, you can't score primary points. So that's a problem. You want to be able to get those primaries. That's the most important thing in the battle, and not the secondary. So if you're destroying your own objectives, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot there. I don't know what you think about that, Alex.
Yeah, I think on paper it seems appealing because, you're simultaneously killing off an objective your opponent could control while also scoring more points on top of that. But ultimately, the only two objectives that you can raise are the two that are on the opposite side of the table in your opponent's, at the edge of your opponent's deployment zone. So they're going to, if they know that you're taking this secondary, they're going to heavily defend those as much as possible because they know that's what you're going to be going for to try to score points. I think in this mission, trying to raise their objectives is not necessarily a bad idea, if you can do it, especially if you're controlling most of the other ones. But taking the secondary to do it, while it looks good on paper, ultimately, I think it's going to be a net loss of points for you. All right, so that brings us to Vital Intelligence. This is another one that has a special mission rule attached with it. So it's an action as well. One unit from your army can start to perform this action at the end of your movement phase and if it is within range of the objective marker, and no enemy units excluding aircraft are within range. This action is completed at the end of your next command phase so long as the unit performing the action is still within range. Again, this is another one of those that depends on your opponent to not do something like kill your unit that is on there or interrupt your action with one of their abilities. So you'll score a number of victory points equal to the number of objective markers you currently control. There are 6 in this, so you could potentially score like 3 to 4 points, but again, it's reliant on your opponent not taking that objective from you or other objectives from you, and also not killing the unit that's performing the action or interrupting it. Again, this is going to be another probably hard pass for us, especially in this mission where it is domination is not taken hold, so you need to control 2 or more objective markers to even score basic 5 points on the mission. So
yeah, I agree with that. You pretty much covered everything on that one. So in Surround and Destroy, there is Surround Them objective. Score 4 victory points at the end of your command phase and at the end of the battle if you control both objectives in your deployment zone and 1 or more objectives in your opponent's deployment zone. Score 8 victory points instead if you control all 4 objective markers that are in deployment zones. So if you're not familiar, there are 6 objectives on the board. There's 2 in each deployment zone, as noted in the objectives. Now, this one is actually reasonably decent. So you most likely will be actually holding both of your deployment zone objectives. So that is one of the prerequisites, as well as having one of your advanced units holding one of your opponent's objectives. Now, with this being said, is our lists do play fairly aggressive, and you do have to hold and keep that objective on your opponent's deployment zone as well as yours, which may be difficult if you are not having a more durable unit there. And once you get there, then if your opponent moves out of the range of your close combat units, then you might be in trouble, wasting utility there. But it is a good chunk of points. So 4 points at the end of your command phase. So that's something that you can just move on to your opponents, but you do have to survive through your opponent's turn. So that's something to think about. But if you get both of them and you've played the game where you have durable enough units, you can potentially get a big score of 8 points in one turn. So you have 5 turns to potentially accomplish this, including the end of the battle. So it's something, if you feel confident that you can go across the board and capture it, it's not a half-assed choice.
Yeah, I think the option there to score a big 8 points, even if it's just one turn that you happen to be able to do that, could really swing this objective into getting max points with it. It also pairs nicely with Engage on All Fronts because the 4 objectives are in the 4 table corners. So you could be looking at 7 points from this and that if you control, you know, 3 of the 4 objectives. It could also be if your opponent wants to take the center of the board, you could use that to your advantage here and give up those center 2 objectives and go for the 4 outside ones because you'll score a lot of points doing so. So it could definitely be worth it. Just need to assess your opponent's list and what you feel like the battle is going to unfold. All right, so that brings us to battle lines. Vital ground is the objective here, and at the end of each of your command phases, you score 3 victory points if you control the objective marker in your opponent's deployment zone, and score 2 victory points for each objective marker that you control that is not in either player's deployment zone for a maximum of 7. It cannot be scored in the first battle round like primaries. There are only 4 objectives in this mission, so I think this one is actually pretty good. You are going to want to push forward and take those center board objectives. You can score 4 points a turn holding them, and if you're holding them, you're going to score at least 10 points from primaries. Hopefully you're holding your backfield objective as well, which means you're controlling 3 of the 4, and you're going to be getting 19 points a turn out of primaries and secondaries just from this secondary and your primaries, which is great. So I think this one, with our style of list that we like, that's very aggressive, that wants to move in and take and hold the center of the board, this can work very well. And you can even use a unit to push in and try and take their objective and score, again, a big 7 points in a single turn.
Yeah, this one's a really good one. Combos very well with their primaries and a few of the other secondaries out there, and it overall it plays to the strengths of our army, is advancing across the board and into the midboard. So we are very durable. We have large units to prevent the opponent getting close to those to contest. So it's a great secondary to check. So in the Scouring, we have Strategic Scan. And this one is very similar to other secondaries out there, like Scramblers, but I'll read it here real quick. One or more units from your opponent can start to perform this action at the end of your movement phase. Each unit from your army that starts to perform this action must be in range of a different objective marker that has not already been scanned by a unit from your army. A unit cannot start this action while there is any enemy units in range of the same objective marker. This action has to be completed by the end of your next command phase, or at the end of the battle, whichever happens first. If it's successfully completed, that objective marker is said to have been scanned by your army. You score a number of victory points under the table below. So what this means is you actually have to have 4+ scans. There's 5 objectives in the board on this mission, and you cannot have an opponent anywhere near those objectives to be able to complete the action. As said before multiple times throughout this video, is your opponent can interrupt your actions. They can kill you. You have to survive an entire turn to get to your command phase to be able to get there. There are just a whole lot of different things that can go wrong for you that's reliant on your opponent not doing something to you that makes this very difficult to control. The other part of it is of the 5 objectives on the board, none of them are in your deployment zone. So you actually have to advance to the center of the board to make sure that you are scanning these and capturing them at the same time. So it's going to be very difficult to ensure that you get these throughout the turn.
Anytime that you are having to do an action to score points, and that action isn't completed until the start of the end of your or the start of your next command phase, is going to be bad because it gives your opponent a chance to kill or interrupt you, and that's bad. If the action completes at the end of your turn, that is a better option because your opponent, generally speaking, isn't going to have anything. They can't kill you in your own turn, performing an action. I mean, theoretically in melee, but you can't start an action if you're in melee anyway. So there's a lot less variables when it's completed at the end of your turn. It's going to be difficult to justify this one over anything else. All right, so that brings us to Overrun. So Overrun is a progressive objective. Score a number of victory points at the end of your command phase if you control one or more objective markers that are within your opponent's territory as shown below. So you can see the table here. Note that this is opponent's territory, not deployment zone. There's only one objective marker in their deployment zone, but there are 4 in the center of the board, so there's essentially 3 in their territory, which is their half of the board. So you can score 5 points if you control all 3 of those at the end of your command phase. It's not terrible if you're going to plan to control those 2 that are on their side, but at the same time, you got 3 objectives on your half of the table, and you're going to be probably giving up one or more of those in order to try to control the one on your opponent's side. So you have to think carefully about taking this, because the odds of you controlling all 3 are probably very low. And, getting 2, which would give you 3 victory points, is certainly doable, but you have to consider how stretched thin you're going to be. Are you really going to be able to control those objectives and take them from your opponent and hold them? Or are you just going to end up contesting them? So it could work, but I think there are better options.
Yeah, this one is going to force you to spread really thin. Most Space Marine lists are going to be running between 8 and maybe 14 units in their list typically, especially the Black Templars. So you have to really split your units all the way up to get all of those, and really you can't guarantee that you're going to survive to score them, or if you do, you're going to put yourself kind of at a disadvantage of if your opponent can put a good counter offensive towards those units on the board. So you're kind of spreading too thin to be picked, honestly, in my opinion. So then we have Sweep and Clear. The secondary is Direct Assault. Score 3 victory points if you control either the objective marker in the center of the board or the objective marker in your deployment zone at the end of your turn, or 5 victory points if you control both. This is also the mission that allows you to move off of your objective if you have controlled it at the end of your command phase, as long as your opponent did not have some movement shenanigans to get into that objective to control it. So this one has 5 objectives. So there's 1 in each deployment zone and the center board, and then 2 in the alternate quarters. So this one's actually a really great secondary to pick. So comboing the fact that you can use the objective cleared special mission rules to leave your objectives to grab some of the secondary ones in the board, it's a great unit. We advance and attack with most of our lists, so we want to be in the center of the board. That is something that combos very well with Oath of Moment, and we also want Engage on all fronts for a very commonly picked one. So this one's going to be something that you're going to be doing anyway, and get some additional points. It does give you 3 points just for the one, which is, if you do that every single turn, you'll get your 15 points. Usually that's something that you can accomplish, but you can get the fell 5 points. And if you had a good turn, you can cut the turns that you need to get those points down. So this one's a really good one.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I really like this one. As you said, it pairs extremely well with Oath of Moment. You're going to be doing Oath of Duty and Direct Assault, accomplishing the same thing at once and sitting on a primary. So you're essentially scoring 2 secondaries and a primary just by having a unit control that center objective, which is great. And that is exactly the type of thing that we want to be doing as Black Templars. We want to march our most durable and deadly melee unit into the center of the board and hold it. We can score a lot of points with this one. So yeah, really great choice to take with this mission with our style of play. All right, and that brings us to our last one, which is priority targets. It is a progressive objective, and it score 3 victory points if you control either of the priority objective markers. See to the left, there's a mission rules that allow you to identify priority objective markers at the end of your turn, or 5 if you control both of these. For me personally, I'm going to leave this one at home simply because it's going to require me to be across the board in my opponent's territory, and the way the caddy corner deployment is of this is going to be stretched pretty thin. I feel like Oath of Moment is probably the better choice in this mission, simply because there is a center objective and I want to be on it. So something like Engage on All Fronts is going to be easier to score than this will be.
I agree, and this one is something that your opponent's going to know right off the bat, because you're secretly having those and you're both revealing them, so your opponent's going to know which one that you're going to want to be going after, and they're going to defend it. So
yeah, similar to Rays.
The other part is, because they're getting repositioned across the board, you could potentially really hard press to get to the objective. There's other better ones out there.
All right, so that about wraps it up for all of the different objectives. We've given you our thoughts on all of them. Now we're just going to kind of quickly go through. Bob, what are your go-tos without knowing what your opponent is, or potentially what the mission is? What are the 3 that you would recommend the most?
All right, so one of the ones that I'm going to be taking is going to be out of No Mercy, No Respite, out of our book, Oaths of Moment. This is nearly a 100% take for me, and pretty much all missions. It's just too easy to score points for Space Marines. At least 10 we can almost guarantee getting in every battle, no matter what. Now, it may not necessarily synergize super well with the mission that you're playing if there's no center objective, but even still, we can get a unit that's in the center of the board. Most of our lists have something that can hold the board, whether it be Dreadnought or maybe Terminators or something in the middle of the board to capture that 2 points. But even if you don't, this is almost a sure take. So that one's going to be one of the first ones that I'm looking at right away. Then the next one I'm going to be looking at is going to be Engage on All Fronts. Our style of lists that we are building, we're going to want to be advancing across the board. We're always going to be taking our deployment zone. In quite few missions, it's actually the long ways across the board, so you will actually have 2 quarters just in your deployment zone. So that's something that's very easy to accomplish. All you have to do is advance a little bit into your opponent's side of the board, and you'll get that 3rd objective. And most times you can get 4. All you have to do is get them in the opponent, or in those quarters, and survive the turn. So that's something that we can certainly accomplish with our lists. And the final one that I'm looking at most of the time is going to be Deploy Scramblers. This is also a very easy 10 points to get on your board. You're not going to get the full 15, which is kind of a downer, but you will be able to easily deploy your Scramblers in your deployment zone and the middle no man's land. All you have to have is build something in your list that can advance far enough, whether it be through its own movement or maybe outflank or just strategic reserves. We have an excellent unit in the Cenobite Servitors that is perfect for this role. All it has to do is come on the board, on your opponent's side of the board, hide somewhere, and get that deployed Scrambler, and then it can go die. It's 18 points for basically giving yourself almost 3 points for the battle. So that's something that you can't overlook. So those are going to be the 3 that I normally take without having anything in your opponent's side of the board to decide on, or knowing what the missions are. Against the right list, you might take something in the Purge the Enemy like Titan Hunter or Bring It Down, or Assassinate against the right list if it makes it easy, or Abhor the Witch is also another one. Or you could also take something from the mission Secondaries, depending on what you're facing and what your game plan is with your list. So, but those 3 standard ones are pretty good no matter what you have. or what you're facing and what the missions are. You just might make some changes based on what you're facing on the board and the missions that you're playing.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I am of the same mind on that. You know, so that is our video on the secondaries. Thanks for sticking with us. I know this is a long video, but there was a lot to cover. We wanted to make sure that we went over all of the secondaries that are going to be relevant for you guys. So tell us down in the comments, what did you think about, our choices? Have you had success with ones that maybe we weren't too hot on? And if you have any questions about us, please let us know. We would love to make sure that you guys are choosing the right secondaries so that you can do well in your games. Secondaries are one of the, even though their name is secondary, they are one of the most important choices you can make in helping you win games. So that wraps it up for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you want to see more content like this, hit that subscribe button and make sure you click the bell icon to get notified on all of our latest content. We have a Patreon and we greatly appreciate their support. So if you'd like to get some exclusive content or you'd just like to support the channel, we really appreciate it. Also, be sure to check out our Discord. We have an active community of players on there where you can get lots of help or discussion on all things Black Templars. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.